In this video, you are going to be responsible for filling out the rest of the read command. Now, the read command does have an else if block defined below where we call getNote. And getNote is defined over inside of notes.js, even though currently it just prints out some dummy text. What you're going to need to do is wire both of these up. Now, before I set you free, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'd like you to do. First up, you are going to need to do something with the return value from getNote. Our getNote function is going to return the note object if it finds it. If it doesn't, it'll return undefined, just like we do for add note up above. After you store that value, you're going to do some printing using console.log similar to what we have here. Obviously, note created will be something like note read, and note title taken will be something like note not found. But the general flow is going to be exactly the same. Now, once you have that wired up inside of app.js, you can move on to notes.js, filling out the function. Now, the function inside of notes.js isn't going to be that complex. All you need to do is fetch the notes like we've done in every single method so far. Then you're going to use notes.filter, which we explored, to only return notes whose title matches the title passed in as the argument. Now, in our case, this is either going to be 0 notes, which means the note is not found, or it's going to be 1 note, which means we've found the note that the person wants to return. From here, we do need to return that note. It's important to remember the return value from notes.filter is always going to be an array, even if that array only has 1 item. What you're going to need to do is return the first item in the array. If that item doesn't exist, that's fine. It'll return undefined like we want. If it does exist, great. That means we found the note. This method should only require 3 lines of code, 1 for fetching, 1 for filtering, and the return statement. Now, once you have all that done, I do want you to test it out. Try reading a note whose title does not exist, then try reading a note whose title exists inside of your notes data.json file. In this case, I could try to buy, and I could also try to not buy. And in that case, to not buy should return the message note not found. Now, if you do things slightly different than what I do later in this video, that is fine, as long as you get the core functionality working. So take a moment to pause the video, try to knock this out and test it, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. How'd it go? Hopefully you didn't have too much trouble wiring up the read command. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is fill out right here inside of app.js a variable called note, which is going to store the return value from getNote. Now, this could be an individual note object or it could be undefined. Down below, I can use an if statement to print the message if it exists or if it does not exist. I'm going to use if note just like I do above, and I am going to attach an else clause. This else clause will be responsible for printing an error if the note is not found. Let's get started with that first, since it's pretty simple. Console.log note not found. Awesome. Now that we have our else clause filled out, we can go ahead and fill out the if statement up above. The first thing I'm going to do is print a little message, console.log, something like note found will get the job done. Then we can move on to printing the actual note details. And we already have that code in place. Right up above, we have our hyphenated spacer, then we have our note title and our note body. For the moment, I'm going to copy and paste this code down below, though we will be moving this into a utility function that we use in both places a little bit later. That was not part of the challenge. The challenge was just to get things working, and this does indeed get things working. Now that we're done over inside of app.js, we can move into the notes.js file and fill out that getNote method, because currently it doesn't do anything with the title that gets passed in. Over inside of notes, what you needed to do was fill out those 3 lines. The first one is going to be responsible for fetching the notes. We already have done that before with the fetch notes function. Var notes equals fetch notes. Perfect. And now that we have our notes in place, we can call notes.filter, returning all of the notes. I'm going to make a variable called filtered notes, setting it equal to notes.filter. And now we know that the filter method takes a function. I'm going to go ahead and define an arrow function, just like this. Here we can pass in as many statements as we like. We're going to be using one, and then we'll refactor it to use the expression version. But I find it a lot easier to start with the statements version first, especially when you're new to arrow functions. Right here, we're going to get the individual note passed in, and we're going to return true when the note title, the title of the note we found in our JSON file, equals, using triple equals, title. Perfect. This is going to return true when the note title matches and false if it doesn't. Now, since we are using arrow functions and we only have one line like this where we return something, we can cut out our condition, remove the curly braces, and simply paste that condition right here. This has the exact same functionality, only it's a lot shorter and easier to look at. Now that we have all of the data, all we need to do is return something. And we're going to return the first item in the filtered notes array. Filtered notes. We're going to grab the first item, which is the index of 0, and then we just need to return it using the return keyword. And there we go. Now, there is a chance that filtered notes, the first item, doesn't exist, and that's fine. It's going to return undefined, in which case our else clause will run, printing note not found. If there is a note, great. That's the note we want to print, and over in app.js, we do just that. Now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and test out this brand new functionality over inside of the terminal by running our app using node app.js. I'm going to use the read command, and I'm going to pass in a title equal to some string that I know does not exist inside of a title in the notes data JSON file. Something here. When I run the command, we get right here, note not found. And this is exactly what we want. Now, if I do try to fetch a note where the title does exist, I would expect that note to come back. In the data file, I have a note with a title of to buy. Let's go ahead and try to fetch that one. I'm going to use the up arrow key to populate the previous command and replace the title with to space buy and hit enter. This time around, you can see note found prints to the screen, which is fantastic. Below that, we have our spacers, and below that, we have the title, which is to buy, and the body, which is food, exactly as it appears over inside of the data file. With this in place, we are done the read command. Now, as I talked about earlier, there is one more thing I want to tackle before we wrap this video up. Over inside of app.js, we now have the same code in two places. We have the spacer title body here, and we have that exact same code here. When you find yourself copying and pasting code, it's probably best to break that out into a function that both locations call. This is the DRY principle, which stands for don't repeat yourself. In this case, we are repeating ourselves. It would be best to break this out into a function that we can call from both places. In order to do this, all we're going to do is make a function in notes.js called logNote. Now, this was not part of the challenge. You did not need to do this, but we are going to do it as an exercise in refactoring. Down here below remove note, we can make that brand new function, a variable called logNote. This is going to be a function that takes one argument. That argument is going to be the note object because we want to print both the title and the body. Right here, we'll expect the note to get passed in. Now, filling out the logNote function is going to be really simple, especially when you're solving a dry issue, because you can simply take the code that's repeated, cut it out, and paste it right inside of the function. In this case, the variable names line up already, so there is no need to change anything. Now that we have the logNote function in place, we can go ahead and change things over in app.js. Right here, where we removed the console log statements, we can call notes.logNote, passing in the note object just like this. And we can do the same thing up above. I can remove these three console log statements and call notes.logNote, passing in note. Awesome. And now that we have this in place, we can rerun our program, and hopefully what we see is the exact same functionality. The last thing to do before we rerun the program is export the logNote function down below. LogNote is going to get exported, and we're using the ES6 syntax to do that. With this in place, I can now rerun the previous command from the terminal using up and enter. And right here, we get note found printing to the screen with the title and the body, just like we had before. I'm also going to test out the add command to make sure that one's working. Node app.js add. We'll use a title of things to do and a body of go to post office. Now when I hit enter, we would expect the same log to print as it did before for the add command, and that's exactly what we get. Note created prints, we get our spacer, and then we get our title and our body. That is it for this video. In this one, we were able to successfully fill out that read command, and we also created a really cool utility function that we can take advantage of in multiple places. This keeps our code dry and prevents us from having the same code in multiple places inside of our application. In the next video, we're going to cover one of the most important topics, frankly, in the entire course. This is debugging. Knowing how to properly debug programs is going to save you literally hundreds of hours over your Node.js career. Debugging can be really painful if you don't have the right tools, but once you know how it's done, it really isn't that bad and it can save you a ton of time. So stay tuned. I will see you next time.